Hello everyone. We have with us Shrikant Patil, the CEO and Director of DG Ali. So he's here to talk about the digital identity trust, a new way to authenticate. So over to you, Shrikant.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity for Ajay and team to provide an opportunity on a very new, fresh, but very important topic. I'm going to talk about trust, and trust, in a way, is something which the businesses and societies we've been adopting. We've been totally embracing trust, without which the existence of businesses societies was very difficult. If any of you would have read a book by Dr. Raghuram Rajan called The Third Pillar, it talks about communities. And communities as a third pillar is a very important foundation which has been ignored by the other pillars. Community is based on trust. And when he explains a very simple instrument which is called debt instrument, and the complexities involved in establishing the first debt instrument, we realize that trust is really important for us to do any business. What's happening is, while COVID stampedes around the world, and we see that there are multiple challenges which governments as well as enterprises and individuals are facing. We heard some positive news yesterday. Hopefully things work out fine for everyone. But what's happening is we are also engulfed by the wildfires of digital. And it just in 2 years, and this number by World Economic Forum was published even before uh, the COVID pandemic struck us, that 60% of global GDP will be digitized. As well as by 2030, we are going to see that 70% of new value created will be via digital platforms. And today itself, we have 4.5 billion users who are almost living life in certain countries. You can just live your life in a messenger. You don't even need other apps, creating immense, powerful digital commerce of $50 trillion. But what we also know that during COVID, there have been a lot of issues related to cyber attacks, hacking, and challenges for healthcare as well as heavy industries. Healthcare specifically, we know that there has been there have been a lot of breakthroughs, and people wanted to actually get ahead of each other in the fight of COVID. Heavy industries like ports and manufacturing suffered around 400% increase in threats. And as we see that Accenture as well as World Economic Forum is talking about, uh, global risk coming from cybercrime is going to go up significantly. Now, what is different, right? I mean, we have been confined to the boundaries of our house. You are attending this session, uh, limited access to many resources which were very easily available for us. The personalized physical world works in a different way than the faceless digital world, because the faceless digital world, you really don't know whom you are connecting it, either at the individual level or even at the enterprise level. And this is quite interesting. uh, when I was actually talking to some of the students at SMU, I asked them the question saying, what do you see as the faceless digital world? And what the answer came quickly, saying that you can be anyone, right, on the digital world, which exactly nails down the problem that if you are on the other side and not interacting with the real entity, that could be a challenge. Facebook has removed billions of profiles. We see a lot of challenges with fake news coming in across. Now, there are certain models which have proven themselves very well by establishing digital trust. And I just wanted to highlight that digital trust is not just about individuals, not just about enterprises, but also about objects, also about services, and also about insights. I spoke about fake news. New York Times had come up with analysis on how do we avoid some of the fake news. That's based on insight. We already know that some of the early rise of Alibaba was based on the escrow account, right? And building the P2P platforms, a lot of P2P platforms which are establishing trust in Indonesia, as well as other part of the world, are very popular. Provenance is one of the companies which is offering trust for the entire supply chain, and it's enabling a large ecosystem with creating trust on the objects and Internet of Devices. So these are some of the established models which create trust and which enable business. Now, what does this trust really mean, right? If we really look at the overall aspect of trust, there are four dimensions, and this is something which has come up with a lot of research, which has been presented to different organizations. The first part, where when we think about the physical trust or in the real world trust, we need to identify the person. We need to have the identity of the individual defined very clearly. When we are interacting with someone in the real world, we also need to make sure that there is data privacy, because there are certain unwritten rules. We don't get NDA from everybody whom we speak to, but we know that certain people will not be sharing data if we share it with them, right, with the rest of the world. And then we also want to make sure that when we share the data, somebody is by mistake eavesdropping. They are not able to understand the words or understand the communication we have, right, which kind of leads to the encryption part, right. Then we have the non-repudiation piece, which is about making sure that the data which is, or the decisions or the transactions which have been embedded are able to are able to be recorded as we move forward, right? So in a way, if you think about the anatomy of digital trust, I call it as a provable digital trust. That in the world, when we think about establishing business, we need to have these four dimensions. A lot of the solutions actually cover only one or two part of it, but this is the overall perspective which will create the trust for organizations. Now, digital identity has been treated as one of the most crucial elements. Now, if you see the maps, Sweden started in 2003 with bank ID system. Today, they're actually enabling this entire journey to four banks which have already adopted bank ID system as a single form of authentication for enabling their into the banking system. Estonia has EID. SyncPass has made phenomenal progress, and there is a lot about uh, the face recognition. There is a lot about biometrics which is coming in. Aadhaar is considered as a gold standard across the world. GovPass, as well as some of the work which is happening in Argentina for digital identification system, clearly highlights that the governments are really moving forward with adoption of digital identity. Now, there are some smaller countries like Myanmar, Philippines, who are also adopting digital identity, and that's also becoming an important aspect of how citizens are going to get access to the service. Now, interesting model, which is the Sweden model, is where not only that you are getting the government access, but you are also making sure that you are enabling non-government or the private ecosystem by leveraging government ID. And SingPass is also being used by some of the banks in Singapore to enable access to the banking system. But in a way, I just want you to pause and think about that digital identity is not digitization of identity. It's not about giving a card to someone and saying, look, all your data is there in a static way. Static identity given by governments is only a limited part of identity which is representing us in the digital world. In reality, we hold a mobile number, we have an address, we actually are part of, like, members of insurance companies, we are members of airlines, hotel chain, and all of this actually constitutes digital footprint for us, and that creates a large amount of identity attributes for us. And together with what is being given by government, as well as our digital life data, constitutes the universal identity for us. And I'll tell you why this is important, because when you think about the digital identity or any particular identity, it's used primarily for authentication. But when you go for lending, when you go and ask for a loan, when you go and do certain financial transactions, your eligibility is not covered by largely by the government facilities which are provided. And in reality, government could never catch up with the digital life data which is available around us, and we know how fast that is exploding. eKYC is becoming super important today because we know that because of COVID, people had mobility constraints across the world, including RBI allowed the video KYC. There are certain partnerships by large corporations where video KYC as well as eKYC is considered acceptable. There are certain changes in the laws. Vietnam is thinking about it. Many other countries across the world are thinking about it. But one of the challenges with eKYC is that if we are thinking about eKYC for the sake of just onboarding the customer, the cost of customer acquisition is significantly high. So when we think about eKYC solutions or KYC solutions, if they are enabled by digital identity, they will bring lot of value across the life cycle of the customer. For example, when you are creating the customer affiliation, be it a retail customer or a corporate customer, you will be able to manage a large part of your interaction with the customer in a meaningful way. You're also going to be enable and authenticate some of these to the resources which are available within your organization. And this is an important aspect of a lot of organizations who are trying to digitize their physical services and moving them into online world. So this transition and accessibility of converted digital services is important, that the right stakeholders or the right customers are able to access that. There are significant advantages if you are adopting digital identity to create customer engagement, and it's frictionless. Of course, over a period of time, as you get to provable digital trust, you are able to develop deeper understanding. And this completely changes the way you look at analytics today, because analytics today uh, is all about capturing a lot of data and then building how we want to create a picture of the customer. But when you have provable data, when you are able to manage something which is completely trusted, you look for meaning rather than you look for quantity, right? I would like to just close with this recommendation that when a lot of banks, neobanks, or insurance companies, as well as regular incumbent banks, when they invest in KYC or eKYC solutions, they need to think about the future, which is not too far from today, and look at how you can get those solutions which are enabled by digital identity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shrikant. Any questions, audience? You all can post it on the question tab or maybe raise hand. So we already have Timanna here.
Hi, Timana. Timana here. Hi, Shrikant. Just want to check on the moving away from self-sovereign identity on a blockchain, which is happening in Canada, happening in I think some of the UAE has opened up now. I don't know when India will accept that. Coming down to a digital financial identity, you rightly said what is given by the government. Okay, worldwide identity is not acceptable to the government, so it has to be localized to the country level. Next is it is not good enough. It is good for an utility or an entry point for a service, but it's not good for banking and financial services. So how do we layer it with digital financial identity on a blockchain? How acceptable is it to Singapore government or South Asian government or Indian government in short future?
Yeah, Devanda, thank you for raising this question. So I'll break it into two parts, right? I mean, you talked about in terms of what kind of information or how do we actually relate it, right, with the government. So I would say there are certain governments which are going to be progressive, like Singapore is capturing a lot of data. When you go into my info, you get a lot of information. Now Aadhaar is more on the authentication. There could be some data which can be plugged in, right? But there are data models which come out which will plug in the additional data. So I would say the spectrum of the spectrum of offerings coming from governments would be probably ranging from just giving them identity and enabling the authentication, and maybe covering certain part of data where the decisions can be made, right? For example, in Singapore, on my info, you could just get credit card information, and there is a set of data which has already been provided. But if you think about certain governments which are still evolving, you may not be able to get all that information. So the self-sovereign identity in case of the different countries, the that model would be little further down the line. It may not work immediately. What we need to think about is the federated model, where what I showed you in the slide, that you have certain data coming with the government, which is validated. And then you have the private partnership where certain data has been hosted and it's also validated, right? So that federated model would work very well across different countries. Now, how much of this push government has to make towards capturing the data depends on what resources government has with it, right? And what level of digitization. Now, blockchain, look, I'm actually a strong supporter of blockchain. I'm not sure that blockchain is the only solution in this area, and it could become very complex if you try to involve. Today we are still struggling to get blockchain as a mainstream technology. So I would say that if you take blockchain, then it will become a two-step process for you to adopt digital identity. You should be able to do adoption of digital identity without blockchain also, and there are certain technologies which allow you to do that.
If it's not blockchain, what are these technologies? Because we are looking at digital financial identity in India. We have already started prototyping and got some support from Government of India, Center of Excellence blockchain. But as you said, it's going to get more complex, not acceptable to the banks, and regulator has not looked at it yet. It could be costly also for us. So I don't know.
Of course, it will be super expensive. So to give you, I mean, I can send you some more material, but it's very simple that you think about cryptographic identities, right? And those are alternatives to blockchain-based identities. Now, blockchain would, when you use cryptographic identity, at some point in time when you start creating an ecosystem, you may need blockchain, but that is an optional thing for you to take care of. But we can have an offline conversation, and I can share for you a few technologies which are available in this space.
Thank you so much.
Do we have one more question?
Yeah, we have a question here. Great session by Saurabh Raj, founder at Finovate. Great session, Shrikant sir. How do we see the personal data protection in the context of digital identities?
Yep. So if you look at the framework which I talked about, digital identity, and it's as I mentioned earlier, it's misconstrued as digitization of identity. It's basically saying taking the passport and then digitizing the passport so we don't need it. But I always ask this question is, so what of digital identity, right? What do you do with digital identity? It's not about just saying look, I can digitize identity, I can capture this, and as I mentioned, you could do KYC with fantastic KYC process, but you don't onboard the customer in a true identity sense. Then your KYC process is going to be not going to give you that level of returns, right? So data protection has to be embedded with digital identity. And I'm happy to share some more technologies where when you create identity, they are embedded as part of data protection. User consent is embedded as part of your identity, so that all the data which you are collecting, be it in the center SSI model, self-sovereign model, or in the federated model, you are able to control, and you are able to make sure that it is provable data around you, so that you don't see any challenges in terms of managing it, and your consent is also recorded. So those kind of things are required. It's all linked. You shouldn't think about personal data protection separately.
Thanks, Shrikant. Okay,